Big Shaq thought he was just enjoying his lake. But when Joanna Sterling demanded he move his boat, she had no idea who she was messing with. The lake wasn't just his refuge. It was his legacy. Secrets were about to surface, and the ones who thought they held all the cards were about to face a truth they never saw coming. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. On a sun-drenched morning, the lake shimmered like polished glass, its surface broken only by the occasional ripple from a breeze slipping through the tall pines lining its banks. Shaquille O'Neal, Big Shaq to those who knew him, sat comfortably in his boat, a quiet sentinel in the heart of this pristine stretch of water. His broad frame, draped in a simple white tee and well-worn jeans, was almost incongruous with the luxury of the lake's surroundings. But he fit here, more than any man in a tailored suit or polished loafers could ever hope to. He let his thoughts wander with the hum of the morning. The lake had a way of muting the noise of the world, swallowing distractions in its depths. The distant buzz of cicadas mingled with the occasional call of a loon, and for a time it felt as if the world belonged only to him and the slow drift of his boat. This was his sanctuary, a place he had claimed not with arrogance but with an understanding of what it meant to belong, not to the land but with it. Yet even as he soaked in the gentle tranquility, there was a prickle at the edge of his awareness, like a shadow falling just out of sight. It wasn't the wind. No, this was a tension he'd felt before, an undercurrent of something just beneath the surface, waiting to break. He scanned the shoreline, his dark eyes narrowing slightly, though his face remained calm. A caravan of gleaming SUVs pulled up to the private access road on the east side of the lake, their engines grumbling with entitlement. Doors slammed, echoing unnaturally across the water. Laughter, sharp and brittle, followed. Men and women in pastel polos and high-end sandals disembarked, their chatter filled with the clipped arrogance of people who believed the world was theirs for the taking. Folding chairs and fishing gear were unloaded with careless ease, as though this lake was merely another backyard pool. Shaq's lips pressed into a thin line, though no one was close enough to see. He didn't need to hear their voices clearly to understand the type. The exclusive fishing club had arrived, the one that flaunted its wealth and connections, believing every inch of shoreline should bend to their whims. He had seen their like before, people who smiled with condescension and claimed spaces without thought for who might already be there. One of the men, a tall, wiry figure with slicked-back hair and sunglasses perched on his head like a crown, strode to the water's edge, planting a flag of sorts with his presence. Shaq recognized him as the club's manager, though he didn't bother to recall his name. The man's voice carried over the lake, not quite a shout but loud enough to mark territory, discussing plans for a private event the following weekend, their intentions to secure the best spot. Shaq remained seated in his boat, drifting, an immovable presence. He didn't need to announce himself. The lake, in its quiet dignity, was already his ally. He felt no urge to confront, to disrupt, but the shift in energy was undeniable, the air itself seeming to tighten with each arrogant laugh that echoed over the water. A woman's voice rose above the others, shrill with the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "Excuse me," she called, her words piercing the calm. "You. Yes, you in the boat. You are in our way. We need you to move your boat. This is a reserved area for our club's use." Shaq turned his head slowly, meeting her gaze across the water. She was tall, thin, with platinum blonde hair cut into a severe bob. Her clothes, pressed linen slacks and a pastel sweater tied around her shoulders, spoke of old money and unspoken rules. Her expression was practiced, polite in a way that barely concealed a sharp edge. Shaq's voice was low, steady. "There are no reserved spots on this lake," he said, his words measured and even. "I'm just out here enjoying the day." The woman's brows lifted in disbelief, her laugh brittle. "I think you misunderstand. This is a private club event. We've reserved this area. You're going to need to move. Now." Shaq's hands rested lightly on the worn wood of his boat. He didn't rise, didn't argue. Instead, he let silence fill the space between them. A pause long enough for the birds to resume their chorus. The woman's smile faltered, confusion threading through her impatience. Behind her, other club members gathered, murmuring among themselves. Shaq could hear the half-suppressed comments, remarks about some guy taking up space, questions of whether he even belonged there. Their assumptions floated on the breeze like pollen, invisible but potent. Still, Shaq remained where he was, the picture of unbothered ease. He knew this kind of confrontation too well. The entitlement, the presumption, the thinly veiled racism, wrapped in polite demands. It wasn't new, but it still stung, the way it always had. The difference now was that he no longer needed to justify his presence. He wasn't just a man with a boat on a lake. He was the owner of this lake, a fact he kept close to his chest like a card not yet played. The woman Joanna Sterling and her club had no idea. They saw only what they wanted to see. A black man in a boat, an obstacle to be moved, a presence to be dismissed. The sun climbed higher, gilding the lake with light, but the air seemed cooler now, tinged with the brittle tension of an impending storm. Shaq's thoughts were calm, deliberate. He knew this wasn't the time to reveal everything. Let them show their hand first. Let them believe their imagined authority still held sway. He adjusted his cap, leaned back slightly, and allowed the wind to carry him a little further into the lake's embrace. Around him, the water whispered against the hull of the boat, as though reminding him that patience was its own form of power. The fishing club's laughter continued, but there was an edge to it now, a brittle quality that spoke of uncertainty. Big Shaq watched, silent and still, as the shadows stretched a little longer, and the storm, though yet unseen, gathered at the horizon. The sun cast a warm haze over the lake, but the air had turned brittle, crackling with unspoken tension. Shaquille O'Neal, Big Shaq to some, sat steady in his boat, his large hands resting calmly on the sides as he drifted near the shoreline. The fishing club had grown louder, their voices filling the air with hollow laughter and territorial arrogance. Their pastel clothes and expensive gear flashed against the serene backdrop of the lake, an unintentional declaration of their entitlement. A figure broke from the group, cutting across the manicured grass towards the water's edge. Joanna Sterling's heels clicked against the flagstones as if she were pacing a boardroom rather than approaching a lake. Her pressed linen slacks and oversized sunglasses shouted of curated wealth. Her voice, shrill with false charm, reached Shaq across the water before she even stood at the shore. "Excuse me, you there," she called, waving a manicured hand like she was beckoning a waiter. "Yes, you. I need you to move your boat. You're in the club's reserved area, and we need that space." Shaq lifted his head slightly, his deep eyes locking onto hers from beneath the brim of his baseball cap. He didn't flinch, didn't react beyond the faintest tightening of his jaw. "There aren't any reserved areas on this lake," he said evenly, his voice a low rumble of calm. Joanna's mouth twisted into a forced smile, thin and brittle. "I think you're confused. This part of the lake is for private club use. We've scheduled this event for weeks, and you're in the way. Please be reasonable and move your boat." Her tone dripped with condescension, the kind that assumed immediate compliance. Shaq's fingers lightly tapped the side of his boat, a rhythm of patience. He wasn't surprised, not really. These encounters had a pattern, authority wrapped in civility, a smile that bared its teeth without showing them. His mind flickered back to a younger version of himself, a teenage Shaq standing on a basketball court, while a security guard questioned his right to be there, or the time a neighbor called the police because a suspicious man was jogging in the neighborhood. Each memory sharpened the edge of this moment, but he kept his voice measured, his posture relaxed. "I'm just here enjoying the day," he said, his words deliberate, unhurried. Joanna's smile faded, her eyes narrowing. "Enjoying the day is fine, but you're occupying space we need for our members. This isn't personal, but we need you to move along." A few club members had drifted closer, forming a loose semicircle behind her. Shaq noted the crossed arms, the way their eyes flicked between him and Joanna, gauging the temperature of the situation. He could almost hear the unspoken words hanging in the air, words dressed in polite phrases but heavy with disdain. A man with salt and pepper hair and a blue cashmere sweater, Rutherford, he remembered from some past encounter, stepped forward. "Miss Sterling's right," he added smoothly. "This event has been on the books for a while. We've reserved this area for our members and guests. It's best if you move now before it becomes an issue." Shaq inhaled slowly, the air filling his broad chest. The calm was an armor he wore well, but beneath it was the quiet fury of a man who'd seen this scene play out too many times. He knew their type, those who believed money and social ties granted them dominion over everything they touched. The problem was, they had no idea whose lake this was. "I'll be staying," Shaq said simply, his tone final without being confrontational. Joanna's cheeks flushed a delicate pink that wasn't from the sun. She tilted her head, her voice tightening. "Look, I don't think you understand who we are. This is a private event. Our club is very selective. If you don't move your boat, I'll have to call someone. I'm sure you don't want that kind of trouble." Her words hovered in the air like a threat coated in sugar. But Shaq didn't blink. Behind her, a few murmurs rippled through the group. There was a shift in the atmosphere, tension thickening, like humidity before a storm. They hadn't expected resistance. Not from someone like him. Shaq's silence stretched, deliberate and steady. He met Joanna's gaze without flinching, his eyes dark and impenetrable. The club members fidgeted, their nervousness growing with each second he refused to comply. It was a standoff, but one where only Joanna believed she held any power. She glanced back at Rutherford, as though seeking his support. He gave a small nod, and she turned back to Shaq, her smile now brittle as glass. "Fine. If you insist on being difficult, we'll have to involve the authorities. I'm sure they'll be interested to hear how you're disrupting a private gathering." Shaq's lips curved into the faintest smile, not of amusement, but of quiet resolve. He didn't move, didn't speak, just let her words hang there, empty and impotent. Inside he felt a slow burn, not of anger, but of deep weariness. How many times had he seen this play unfold? The assumption that a black man on a boat must be intruding, must be a problem to solve. The calculated threats wrapped in politeness, the belief that the rules bent for those with the right connections. It was a script he knew by heart, and one he had no intention of following today. The wind shifted, carrying the sharp scent of pine and water. Birds scattered from the trees, their wings beating against the sky. The moment felt suspended, a breath held too long. Joanna's voice, when it came again, was tight and clipped. "You're making a scene. If you don't move, I'll have no choice but to call security. We'll have you removed. You don't belong here." Those last words, though said in a tone of false civility, were a slap across the water. Shaq's fingers flexed against the wood of his boat, but his voice, when it came, was low and controlled. "I belong here more than you know," he said, each word weighted with truth she couldn't yet comprehend. Behind him, the lake rippled in a sudden breeze, as if the water itself acknowledged the shift in balance. The club members exchanged glances, their confidence beginning to fracture. Joanna opened her mouth to speak again, but something in Shaq's steady gaze stopped her. For a heartbeat, uncertainty flickered across her face, a crack in the max of superiority. The silence stretched once more, heavy with the weight of things unsaid. And then, without another word, Shaq turned his gaze back to the horizon, his posture unchanging. The confrontation for now was over, but the real storm had only just begun. The lake's surface shimmered, its mirror reflecting the golden light of the afternoon sun. But for Shaquille O'Neal, the stillness was deceptive. Beneath the calm, memories stirred like currents waiting to rise. He sat in his boat, anchored in place, the weight of the past pressing gently against his shoulders. His gaze drifted across the shoreline, where the fishing club's laughter continued, oblivious to the quiet storm that brewed within him. Long before he became Big Shaq, the household name, he was just a boy from Newark, a child raised by a mother who understood the weight of the world better than most. Lucille O'Neal was a tower of quiet strength, her words carrying the authority of hard-earned wisdom. She worked 2 jobs, kept food on the table, and never once let Shaq forget that respect wasn't something handed out. It was something earned through integrity, patience and resilience. He could still hear her voice echoing in his mind, sharp and certain as the crack of a whip. "Hold your head high, baby," she used to say. "Don't let nobody tell you who you are. You show them with your actions, not your anger." It wasn't always easy. There were times when the slights were subtle, when a teacher's glance lingered a moment too long, or a neighbor crossed the street to avoid passing him. Other times it was blatant, a shouted insult, a sneer at a grocery store, a door slammed a little too quickly in his face. Each incident built upon the last, layering like bricks in a wall, meant to keep him in his place. Basketball had been his escape, the one place where the court didn't care about the color of his skin or the zip code on his mail. But even there, the expectations were suffocating. Coaches who saw him only as raw talent, reporters who turned his interviews into soundbites about athleticism and aggression. No one asked about his thoughts, his dreams beyond the game. They saw the towering frame, the slam dunks, the stats, but not the young man inside who read poetry late into the night, or who volunteered at local shelters because he remembered what hunger felt like. The boat rocked gently, as a breeze stirred the water, but Shaq's thoughts were anchored firmly in the past. He remembered the first time he realized his height and fame weren't shields against racism. It was at a charity gala, Shortly after he'd signed his first major contract, a man in a tailored suit and an insincere smile had approached him, clapping him on the back like they were old friends. "You've really made it," the man had said, his voice loud enough to draw attention. "From the streets to the big leagues. Must be nice to finally be somebody." The words were framed as praise, but Shaq had felt the sting beneath them. The implication that he hadn't been somebody before, that his worth was measured only in points and rebounds. Lucille's lessons had steadied him then, as they did now. He hadn't lashed out, hadn't let the moment define him. Instead, he'd smiled politely, shaken the man's hand, and walked away, his dignity intact. It was a strategy born not of weakness, but of understanding, a refusal to let ignorance dictate his worth. Now, as he watched Joanna Sterling and her fishing club lay claim to the lake's edge, the old anger stirred, but he held it down like a dam holding back a flood. He wasn't the hot-headed young man people expected. He was deliberate, measured, his power lying not just in his physical stature but in his ability to remain calm while others unraveled. The world expected him to react with rage, to give them the excuse they needed to dismiss him. He wouldn't give them that satisfaction. He thought of his mother again, of her hands calloused from years of work, her voice unwavering even when the bills stacked higher than the food in the pantry. She'd taught him the importance of grace under pressure, of knowing when to speak, and when silence could be its own form of strength. "Your presence speaks louder than your fists ever could," she'd said, and she'd been right. The memories wove together like a tapestry, each thread a moment from his past. The high school principal who doubted his intelligence, but praised his athletic ability. The college recruiter who spoke of scholarships with an edge of condescension. The first agent who tried to steer him into endorsement deals that played into stereotypes. He had resisted them all, carving out a space for himself on his own terms, building not just a career but a legacy. That legacy wasn't measured in championship rings or highlight reels. It was in the respect he commanded without raising his voice. The quiet acts of generosity few ever saw. It was in the scholarship funds he'd established for underprivileged kids, in the community centers he'd helped renovate, in the countless times he'd listened more than he spoke. It was in the patience he showed now, sitting in his boat while the fishing club's entitlement flared and fizzled against his silence. The sun dipped slightly, casting longer shadows across the lake, but Shaq remained a steady figure against the shifting light. The fishing club's laughter rang hollow now, punctuated by uneasy glances toward the man they couldn't intimidate. Joanna Sterling's voice rose again, sharp with frustration, but Shaq barely registered the words. His mind was on the past, on the lessons that had shaped him into the man he was today. He wasn't here just to enjoy the lake. He was here to honor his mother's memory, to live the values she'd instilled in him, to remind himself, and perhaps others, that true strength lay not in the volume of one's voice, but in the depth of one's character. The shadows of his past weren't shackles, they were foundations, steady and unshakable. And as the breeze picked up and the tension on the shore simmered, just below boiling, Big Shaq knew he was exactly where he needed to be. Silent, strong, and unyielding. The sun arced higher, painting the lake with a harsh, white glare. But the air felt tighter now, as though the sky itself sensed the shift. Shaquille O'Neal sat in his boat, his posture unchanged, but his focus sharpened. The fishing club had retreated from the initial confrontation, their laughter more forced now, but something lingered in the air, a scent of secrets, of something darker beneath the surface. Shaq's gaze drifted to Joanna Sterling, her posture a little too stiff, her laugh brittle as she leaned into a conversation with a man dressed in an expensive seersucker jacket and loafers polished to a high gleam. His name, Shaq recalled, was Byron Wexler, a name that carried weight in certain real estate and business circles, though his public reputation was carefully scrubbed clean. Wexler's voice, low but urgent, carried across the water in clipped phrases, enough for Shaq to catch fragments as the breeze shifted. The deal's almost set. Majority stake in the Lake District. Zoning permissions already greased. Just need Sterling to keep this under wraps a bit longer. Shaq's fingers tapped against the worn wood of his boat, the rhythm mirroring the sudden tension coiling in his gut. So this wasn't just about fishing. His instincts had been right. The club wasn't simply entitled and snobbish. They were orchestrating something bigger, something that threatened not just the lake's serenity but the entire community that had grown around it. He watched as Joanna's smile stretched thin, her words sharp but hushed. "Keep those documents locked down. We can't have any leaks. The city council's in our pocket, but public outcry could delay the approvals. We push too hard, we lose the element of surprise." And I don't want that giant out there stirring up trouble. She jerked her head in Shaq's direction, her tone dismissive, but there was a note of irritation, as though his mere presence threatened their carefully laid plans. Byron gave a low laugh, the sound oily and confident. Relax, Joe. He's just a boat on the water. He doesn't know what we're doing. Besides, even if he did, what's he gonna do? It's not like he's gonna rally the town against us. People like us don't get stopped by some local hero. Shaq's jaw tightened, but he remained still, his expression unreadable. They didn't know. They had no idea who they were dismissing as some local hero. The lake wasn't just water to him. It was history, community, and legacy. He'd bought the land around it, not for profit, but to preserve a place where families could come together without being priced out or fenced off by the wealthy elite. The club's plans weren't just an insult, they were a direct threat to everything he'd worked to protect. His thoughts raced, mapping out possibilities, calculating risks. He couldn't confront them outright, not yet. He needed more than hearsay and half-caught whispers, but the pieces were fitting together now. Each fragment of conversation, another stroke on the canvas of corruption. The fishing club wasn't just a gathering of entitled elites. It was a front for a land grab, a play to privatize the lake and cut out anyone who didn't fit their narrow vision of wealth and exclusivity. Eugene Calloway, the young man Shaq had noticed earlier, hovered near the edge of the group, his posture tense, his gaze flickering uneasily between Joanna and Byron. His discomfort was evident, the way his arms crossed too tightly, the way he hesitated before nodding along to whatever was being said. Shaq's instincts sharpened. Eugene wasn't fully aligned with them. There was something in his stance, a crack in the facade that hinted at reluctance, maybe even regret. The conversation shifted again, this time focusing on timelines and permits, legal loopholes, and financial maneuvers. They spoke in the coded language of power, tossing around terms like exclusive zoning rights and expedited contracts, with a casual arrogance that made Shaq's blood simmer. These weren't just plans, they were threats, cloaked in legality, but dripping with exploitation. Shaq shifted slightly, adjusting his position in the boat, making it seem as though he was simply enjoying the view. But every word, every gesture, he memorized, cataloging the players in this hidden game. Joanna's sharp commands, Byron's oily reassurances, Eugene's hesitant silences. They painted a picture of collusion and complicity, yet none of them seemed to suspect that the man they dismissed as a harmless obstacle was quietly assembling the puzzle. The lake itself seemed to darken under the weight of their intentions. What had once been a sanctuary for families and locals, a place where children learned to fish and elders shared stories on the shore, was now a battleground disguised as a playground. The club's plan wasn't just about profit, it was about erasure, about transforming a shared community space into a private enclave for the privileged few. Shaq's mind flashed back to his mother's words, the weight of her teachings anchoring him. "Don't let them make you small," Lucille had said. "They'll try, but your worth isn't for them to decide." He let the words settle, grounding him against the rising tide of frustration. This wasn't the time for confrontation. It was the time to listen, to gather information, to let them believe they were untouchable. As the afternoon sun dipped slightly, casting long shadows across the water, Shaq's resolve hardened. Joanna Sterling and her cronies thought they were playing a game of power and influence. But they had miscalculated. They hadn't counted on a man like him, patient, perceptive, and deeply rooted in a community they dismissed as expendable. They hadn't realized that the lake they planned to exploit was already in the hands of someone who saw its true value, not in dollars but in dignity. Eugene's hesitation caught Shaq's attention again. The young man's eyes darted toward him, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face before he quickly looked away. There was something there, a potential crack in the club's armor, a weak link in their chain of arrogance. Shaq tucked the observation away, a mental note to revisit later. For now he sat silent in his boat, letting the sun's glare mask the intensity of his thoughts. The club's laughter continued, brittle and forced, unaware that their secrets were no longer secrets. The wind rippled across the lake, carrying whispers of their plans, but Shaq remained unmoved. The storm was gathering, and when it broke, it wouldn't be the storm the fishing club expected. It would be the quiet, unshakable force of a man who had waited, watched, and was ready to strike, not with fists, but with truth. The late afternoon sun dipped toward the treetops, casting long shadows that rippled across the lake's surface. Shaq remained in his boat, His posture deceptively relaxed as his sharp gaze followed the subtle shifts on the shoreline. While the club members laughed and drank, their conversations floating across the water like brittle reeds, he noticed something deeper, an undercurrent of tension that pulsed beneath the outward facade of wealth and camaraderie. His attention settled on Eugene Calloway, a man whose youthful features were set tight with a barely masked unease. While the others mingled easily, Eugene kept to the edges of the gathering, his hands stuffed into his pockets, his shoulders stiff. Shaq could see it. The practiced nods, the hesitant laughter, the quick darting glances at Joanna and Byron when they spoke. This wasn't the behavior of a man fully aligned with their agenda. It was the posture of someone under pressure, someone navigating a storm brewing just beneath the surface. Shaq shifted his weight slightly, his boat rocking gently as he leaned back, as if simply enjoying the view. But inside, his mind clicked into place, the realization forming like a puzzle's final piece. Eugene was more than just a reluctant participant. He was a man caught between ambition and conscience, a man who knew more than he should, and was too afraid, or perhaps too entangled to break away cleanly. He let his gaze drift, watching as Joanna's laugh rang out, a brittle sound that cracked against the tension in the air. She clutched a glass of champagne, her gestures sharp, her words laced with barely concealed irritation. Byron Wexler stood at her side, his voice low and controlled, murmuring reassurances that didn't quite soothe her. Shaq's ears caught snippets of their exchange, words cloaked in casual tones but weighted with menace. He's been asking too many questions. We can't have him jeopardizing everything. If he doesn't fall in line, we'll cut him loose, make an example if we have to. Shaq's lips pressed into a thin line, his pulse steady. There it was, the confirmation of Eugene's silent struggle, the proof that beneath the club's polished veneer lay cracked spiderwebbing through its foundation. They weren't just schemers, they were enforcers, ready to silence dissent, to protect their hidden agenda at any cost, short of physical violence. The danger wasn't overt, but it coiled in their words, a threat dressed in civility. Eugene's movements grew more strained as the afternoon wore on. He laughed too loudly at a joke, his eyes darting nervously toward Joanna. He nodded too quickly at Byron's subtle commands, but there were moments, brief, flickering, when his gaze met Shaq's across the water, and something raw and desperate passed between them. It was an unspoken plea, a question lingering in the space between their shared silence. Do you see what I see? Do you know? Shaq held that gaze, just for a second longer than necessary, then let it drift away, a quiet acknowledgement that he understood. But he didn't act, not yet. Timing was everything, and Eugene's fragile position within the club's hierarchy needed to play itself out before Shaq could intervene. The fishing club's laughter rose again, louder now, more forced, like brittle glass under pressure. The conversations turned sharper, words laced with double meanings, casual remarks that hinted at coercion and control. A woman in a pale blue dress. Shaq didn't know her name, but her voice carried joked about how everyone knew better than to cross Joanna. Another man, his blazer creased from being worn too long, murmured about the last guy who didn't play ball, his chuckle low and humorless. Shaq listened, his expression unreadable. His years in the public eye had taught him to absorb, to let people show their cards while he kept his own close. The club members were revealing themselves, each interaction painting a clearer picture of an organization built not on camaraderie, but on leverage and threats. They were sharks circling the lake, their smiles baring teeth when they thought no one was watching. Eugene drifted closer to the water's edge, his movements hesitant. He stared at the lake, at Shaq's boat, as if searching for something solid to hold on to. For a moment, Shaq thought he might speak, might break from the group's magnetic pull, but then Joanna's sharp voice cracked across the distance.
"Eugene, over here," she called, her tone light but edged with command. "Don't wander off. We're discussing next week's meeting with the council. Your input's needed."
Eugene's shoulders stiffened. He hesitated a beat too long before turning back, his steps heavy, his face a mask of reluctant compliance. Shaq's eyes narrowed slightly, the momentary glimmer of resistance in Eugene's posture snuffed out by Joanna's call. The younger man wasn't ready to step out of line, not yet. The sun dipped lower, shadows lengthening across the lake, the water now reflecting streaks of orange and gold. But the beauty of the scene was marred by the knowledge swirling beneath its surface. Shaq's boat remained anchored, a silent observer amidst the cracks widening in the club's foundation. The story unfolding wasn't one of simple entitlement. It was a tale of corruption, coercion and control, a quiet war waged with contracts and intimidation instead of fists. And Shaq, patient and steady, was gathering the pieces, waiting for the right moment to tip the balance. His mother's voice echoed faintly in his mind, reminders of resilience, of quiet strength in the face of injustice. He wouldn't act hastily. He wouldn't confront them with empty accusations. No, he would wait, gather proof and let their own machinations unravel them. Eugene glanced back once more before slipping into the circle of Joanna and Byron, his face pale and strained. Shaq's gaze followed him, his thoughts a steady drumbeat beneath the rising tension. The club thought they held all the power, but they were blind to the storm gathering just beyond their sight. As the shadows deepened, the surface of the lake smoothed into glass, hiding the currents roiling beneath. Secrets whispered through the reeds and the hush of the trees, and Shaq sat silent, steady, ready for the moment when the truth would finally break through. The sun, now a muted gold, cast an ethereal glow over the lake, the light skimming across the water like a secret whispered into the wind. Shaquille O'Neal sat unmoved in his boat, his stillness so profound it felt almost unnatural against the growing tension on shore. The fishing club's chatter had thinned into murmurs, but the air still bristled with the arrogance of entitlement and the buzz of calculated schemes. They stood there, polishing their wine glasses and rehearsing lines of influence, blind to the quiet force anchored in the middle of their assumed dominion. Shaq let his gaze drift over the landscape, the familiar trees and shoreline that had, over the years, become more than just scenery. They were symbols of something deeper, something he had fought for in ways that required no courts or protests. His mind slipped back, unbidden, to the day it all began. Years ago, long before the headlines, before the endorsements, before the world learned to chant his name as synonymous with power, he'd stood at this very lake, a younger man with fewer lines on his face, but the same fire in his heart. It had been a quiet transaction, conducted without fanfare or cameras. The land was being quietly sold off, another piece of nature threatened by looming developers eager to transform it into gated retreats and resorts. But Shaq had seen beyond the dollar signs and potential profits. This lake wasn't just property, it was history, community, a refuge for families who couldn't afford high-priced club memberships or vacation homes. It was a place where his mother, Lucille, could sit by the water's edge, without someone asking her to move, where kids could skip stones without feeling unwelcome. He remembered how he'd signed the papers in a nondescript office, listening to the realtor's hesitant explanations about zoning and permits, nodding politely as the man explained how the land was ripe for development. Shaq had smiled softly, concealing the satisfaction he felt as he finalized the deal. The lake and its surrounding lands had become his, not to exploit but to protect, and since that day, he had quietly maintained ownership, ensuring it remained open, wild, and free to the public. Now, as Joanna Sterling and her entourage plotted their takeover, blissfully ignorant of the true owner's presence, Shaq's heart pulsed with a mixture of resolve and quiet amusement. Their schemes were like ripples on the surface, visible but powerless against the depth beneath. They spoke of permits and backroom deals, of silencing Ghent and controlling access, but none of it mattered. The foundation of their plan was built on sand. Joanna's voice sliced through the evening air, sharp and impatient. "We'll finalize the paperwork by next week," she was saying to Byron, her posture stiff, her fingers clutching a folder, as if it contained all the power she imagined herself wielding. "Once we have the council's approval, the rest is just formality. This whole lake will be exclusive by the end of the summer." Byron nodded, his smile a slow curve of confidence. "And if anyone objects, we've got the right contacts. They'll learn quickly that some voices carry more weight than others." Their laughter rang hollow, brittle as dry leaves underfoot. Shaq's lips pressed into a line, his calm deepening. They had no idea that the very land beneath their feet was his, that their whispered strategies were as futile as trying to command the wind. He had let them play their game, let them reveal their true natures, knowing that the moment would come when their carefully constructed illusion would shatter. The lake's surface rippled gently, disturbed only by the occasional fish breaking through to catch the dying light. Shaq's thoughts turned inward, replaying his quiet resolve from years past. His decision hadn't been driven by ego or a desire for revenge against those who underestimated him. It had been a promise to his mother, to himself, and to every person who deserved to feel welcome here. This lake was his testament, not to his wealth, but to his character. He could almost hear Lucille's voice, firm and steady, reminding him to stand tall but stay humble. Let them think what they want, baby, she would say. Your power doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be yours. And it was. Every tree lining the water, every rock along the shoreline, every inch of land the club thought they could claim. It was his. The irony of it all was almost too perfect. The poetic justice of watching them circle like sharks around prey they couldn't even see. But there was no need for gloating. His victory wasn't in their failure. It was in the quiet preservation of something that couldn't be bought with connections or contracts. On shore, Eugene Calloway lingered near the edge, his face a mask of discomfort as he listened to Joanna and Byron discuss timelines and legal maneuvers. His posture screamed reluctance, but the weight of the club's influence held him in place. Shaq's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing the young man's inner conflict. Eugene didn't know the full story, but he felt the wrongness of it. His hesitations weren't lost on Shaq, who recognized the potential for a shift. Eugene could be the first crack in the club's armor, the first to step back from their shadow. But not yet. The moment had to be right. The storm, while gathering, was not ready to break. The suspense was in the waiting, in the quiet anticipation of the revelation that would turn their world upside down. Shaq allowed the scene to unfold, the pieces to fall into place, secure in the knowledge that when the truth came to light, it would be undeniable and irreversible. The sun dipped lower, the lake now a mirror of twilight colors, golds and purples melting into the deepening blue. The club's members began packing their gear, their laughter thinning as the first hints of chill crept into the evening air. They moved with the false confidence of people who believed they had won, unaware that their triumph was a mirage. Shaq's boat drifted slightly with the current, his silhouette a steady presence against the fading light. He could have revealed himself now, could have stood and spoken, unmasking their arrogance with a single declaration. But he didn't. Not yet. The power wasn't in the announcement. It was in the slow, inevitable realization that would dawn upon them when they tried to finalize their plans. They would learn that the lake they sought to claim was already spoken for, already protected by a man who had watched, waited, and chosen his moment with precision. The suspense stretched taut across the water, a silence deeper than any words. Shaq sat in his boat, a quiet sentinel, as the shadows lengthened and the first stars blinked into view. The lake was his, and soon Joanna Sterling and her club would understand just how completely they had underestimated the man they'd tried to push aside. The evening light stretched long shadows across the lake's surface, the water shimmering with the last breath of sunlight. The laughter of the fishing club had thinned into scattered conversations, their earlier bravado fading as the sun dipped lower. Joanna Sterling stood at the shoreline, her posture still stiff with authority, but her voice carried a note of impatience as she wrapped up the day's scheming. Byron Wexler hovered nearby, murmuring reassurances, but even he seemed uneasy, his usual polished confidence dulled by the undercurrent of tension. Shaquille O'Neal's boat drifted closer to the shore, his movements deliberate, the scrape of the hull against the shallows breaking the fragile quiet. He rose, a silhouette framed by the dying light, his height casting a shadow that stretched across the water toward the cluster of club members. His face was calm, unreadable, but his presence was a statement in itself, solid, immovable, undeniable. Joanna turned, her expression flickering between annoyance and forced charm. "Well, it seems you've enjoyed your little outing," she called, her voice bright but brittle. "But as I said earlier, this area is reserved. We really need you to move along. It's nothing personal, of course." Shaq stepped onto the shore, the crunch of gravel under his boots silencing the group. His voice, when he spoke, was low and steady, each word measured with precision. "It's not reserved," he said simply. "Not for you. Not for your club. This entire lake and the surrounding land are private property. My property." The words landed like stones dropped into still water, the ripples of realization spreading through the assembled crowd. For a moment, no one spoke. Joanna's face paled, her smile faltering, as though she hadn't quite heard him correctly. Byron's lips parted in a silent question, his usual composure crumbling under the weight of Shaq's declaration. "What are you talking about?" Joanna demanded, her voice sharp, rising in pitch. "This lake has always been open for club use. We've been coming here for years." Shaq's eyes locked onto hers, unwavering. "You've been coming here without permission, assuming it belonged to no one, or to someone you could manipulate. But this lake and the land around it have been mine for years. I bought it to protect it, to keep it open for the community, not for a private club to exploit and shut out others. You've been trespassing." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document, thick with official seals and signatures. He held it out, his hands steady as he unfolded the papers to reveal the deed to the property. "Here's the proof," he said. "Legal and binding. Your fishing club has no rights here. You've ignored the posted signs, flouted regulations, and now you're in violation of trespassing laws. I suggest you pack up and leave immediately." The silence that followed was brittle, the weight of Shaq's words pressing down like a sudden storm. Joanna's lips moved, but no sound emerged. Byron leaned forward, squinting at the papers, his face contorting with disbelief and a dawning sense of defeat. The other club members exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier confidence dissolving into confusion and panic. "You can't just," Joanna began, her voice cracking with desperation. "This has to be some sort of mistake. We've been planning this for months. We've invested." Shaq's voice cut through her protests like a blade. "The only mistake was assuming you had a right to be here. You've ignored warnings, brushed aside objections, and treated this land as if it were yours to control. But that ends now." Byron stepped forward, his voice low, attempting diplomacy. "Perhaps we can discuss this. There's no need for drama. We can come to some arrangement." Shaq's stare was unflinching. "There's nothing to discuss. You've already made your choices, and now you're facing the consequences. I won't press charges this time, but you will pack up and leave today. Any further attempts to claim this land will be met with legal action. And trust me, I have the means and the will to see it through." The weight of his words hung in the air, undeniable and final. Joanna's hands trembled as she clutched her phone, her attempts to regain control crumbling before her eyes. Byron's shoulders sagged, his polished facade cracking, as he realized the game was lost. The other club members, sensing the shift in power, began gathering their belongings, their faces tight with embarrassment and resentment. Eugene Calloway lingered at the edge of the group, his gaze flickering between Shaq and Joanna, the tension in his posture easing as the truth settled over him. He had suspected, perhaps even known deep down, but now the reality was undeniable. Shaq's quiet strength had revealed the hollowness of the club's authority, the arrogance stripped away to expose their vulnerability. Shaq stepped back, his posture relaxed but his eyes still sharp, tracking every movement as the club members scrambled to pack up their gear. The sun slipped further behind the trees, casting long shadows across the shore, the fading light adding a somber weight to the scene. No one spoke, the only sounds the rustle of bags and the soft clink of glasses being hurriedly packed away. Joanna, her earlier confidence shattered, finally found her voice, though it was thin and strained. "This isn't over," she said, her words more bluster than threat. "You'll hear from our lawyers." Shaq's faint smile held no amusement, only quiet resolve. "They're welcome to call," he said, "but they'll find the law's already spoken. This land is protected, and so is its community. You can't buy or bully your way into ownership. You've lost." The finality of his statement settled like a stone into the lake's depths, its ripples stretching outward. The club members, one by one, retreated, their laughter and arrogance replaced by silence and the shuffle of hurried steps. Eugene lingered the longest, his gaze meeting Shaq's for a brief, unspoken moment of acknowledgement, before he too turned and followed the others. As the last of them disappeared down the path, the air seemed to lift, the oppressive weight of entitlement dissipating like mist. Shaq stood alone at the water's edge, the lake behind him shimmering in the twilight. His presence remained, steady and unyielding, a testament to quiet strength and the enduring power of truth. The eviction was complete, not through force or violence, but through the unshakable authority of a man who had waited, watched, and chosen his moment to speak. The lake settled into an eerie quiet as the sun dipped behind the tree line, its last light casting a burnished glow over the rippling surface. Shaquille O'Neal stood still at the shore, his silhouette tall and resolute against the water's fading shimmer. The air felt different now, lighter somehow, though the echoes of the confrontation lingered like the fading thrum of a distant storm. The fishing club was gone, scattered like brittle leaves before the wind, their laughter and bravado replaced by hurried whispers and retreating footsteps. But as Shaq turned his gaze back toward the horizon, he knew this wasn't over. Their departure was only the beginning. In the days that followed, the fallout from their eviction rippled outward like concentric circles in the water. The local community, small, tight-knit, and keenly aware of the club's history of entitlement, buzzed with speculation. Whispers of what had happened spread from the lakeshore to the town square, from diner booths to church steps. It wasn't long before the media caught wind of the story, reporters with notepads and cameras arriving to capture the quiet drama that had unfolded. The headlines framed it as a confrontation between a wealthy, exclusive fishing club and a lone, determined man who stood his ground. But the true heart of the story wasn't in the eviction itself. It was in the shift it triggered. For years, the club had operated with impunity, its members leveraging influence and wealth to carve out privileges, leaving others feeling unwelcome in spaces that should have been open to all. Now that veneer of invincibility had cracked, and the community was beginning to see just how fragile it really was. Joanna Sterling scrambled to contain the damage. Legal threats were drafted but never delivered. Her lawyers recognizing the ironclad weight of Shaq's ownership and the legitimacy of his actions. Behind closed doors, she convened emergency meetings with Byron Wexler and other high-ranking members, their voices raised in frustration and disbelief. The story had already spiraled beyond their control, and no amount of damage control could fully restore the authority they'd lost. Eugene Calloway, once a reluctant pawn in their schemes, found himself at a crossroads. In the days following the eviction, he withdrew from the club's inner circle, his absence noted but unaddressed. His conscience, already frayed from months of complicity, now frayed further under the weight of public scrutiny. He couldn't shake the image of Shaq standing at the shore, calm and immovable, his quiet authority a stark contrast to the club's bluster. The media spotlight grew, not with the fury of a scandal, but with the steady persistence of a story that refused to fade. Interviews with locals revealed long-standing frustrations, the sense that the club's wealth had created a two-tier system, that their claims of exclusivity were thinly veiled acts of exclusion. Community leaders stepped forward to voice their support for Shaq, praising his patience and integrity. Social media swelled with posts celebrating his stand, the hashtags spreading wider than anyone had anticipated. For Shaq, the attention was unwanted, but unavoidable. He didn't seek the spotlight, but he understood its power. His interviews were brief and measured, his words chosen with care. He didn't vilify Joanna or Byron directly. Instead, he spoke of respect, of the importance of shared spaces, and of the quiet strength it took to stand against injustice without resorting to anger or violence. His calm, steady presence became a touchstone for the community, a symbol of what it meant to protect something sacred without compromising dignity. In contrast, Joanna's public statements, carefully crafted by her PR team, fell flat. Her attempts to frame the incident as a misunderstanding were met with skepticism. Her claims of long-standing rights to the lake sounded hollow against the backdrop of legal documents and community voices. Byron's slick reassurances failed to gain traction, his words dissolving into the static of a public increasingly aware of the club's pattern of entitlement. The real twist came when Eugene, after days of silent deliberation, broke ranks. In a carefully worded letter published in the local paper, he admitted to the club's intentions to privatize the lake, and their disregard for the community's rights. He stopped short of naming names, but made clear his regret, and his decision to step away from the club entirely. His confession, quiet but resolute, added another layer to the unfolding story, casting a harsh light on the club's inner workings, and painting him as a reluctant but necessary ally to Shaq's cause. Shaq read Eugene's letter, with a measured nod, his respect for the young man deepening. He saw in Eugene a reflection of his own younger self, someone caught between ambition and integrity, wrestling with the weight of complicity and the desire to do what was right. Eugene's courage to speak, even in a controlled and careful manner, was a crack in the dam that the club had tried to build around themselves. As days turned into weeks, the community's support solidified. Town meetings, once dominated by voices aligned with the club's interests, shifted to include broader perspectives. Discussions of zoning, access and shared spaces took on a new urgency, propelled by the momentum of Shaq's quiet stand. The lake became more than a body of water. It became a symbol of resistance, of the right to exist in spaces without fear of exclusion or control. The club's influence, once ironclad, eroded with each passing day. Members quietly distanced themselves from Joanna and Byron, their association with the scandal more liability than asset. Shaq, meanwhile, continued his quiet stewardship of the lake, his presence a reminder that real power didn't shout, it simply stood firm. And as the sun set each evening, casting golden light over the water he had fought to protect, Shaq felt the shift not just in the community, but in the delicate balance of respect. It wasn't a victory marked by banners or applause. It was a quieter, deeper triumph, the kind that lingered long after the headlines faded, rooted in the unshakable truth that dignity, patience, and integrity could dismantle even the most entrenched systems of power. The lake's morning stillness wrapped the shore in a quiet that felt almost sacred. The air was crisp, the sky a deep canvas of blue streaked with the first brushstrokes of sunrise. Shaquille O'Neal stood near the water's edge, his broad frame silhouetted against the horizon. The fight had passed, the waves of conflict retreating, but the residue of its impact still lingered like ripples that hadn't yet settled. Behind him, the land stretched wide and open, unmarked now by the club's banners or chairs. It was a clean slate, but not one of erasure, rather one that spoke of reclamation, of a space restored to its rightful calm. The community had begun to reclaim it, their laughter and presence filling it in ways the fishing club never could. Yet even in this quiet triumph, there remained a thread of unfinished business, a story incomplete. Eugene Calloway emerged from the tree line, his steps slow but deliberate, carrying with him a weight he hadn't yet laid down. He was dressed simply, the crisp formality of his previous attire replaced by something humbler. Jeans, a flannel shirt, the posture of a man unburdening himself. His approach was not announced by words or gestures. It was a silent acknowledgement of all that had passed between him and Shaq. He stopped a few paces away, his gaze falling to the ground before lifting to meet Shaq's eyes. There was no fear in his stance, only a quiet humility, a recognition of the wrongs he had been a part of, and the desire to make them right. His hands, once clenched with tension, now hung loosely at his sides, open in a gesture of honesty. Shaq regarded him without speaking, his expression unreadable but his presence calm and steady. It wasn't anger that filled the space between them. It was a quiet understanding, the kind that recognizes the complexities of human failure and the capacity for redemption. The weight of Eugene's silence spoke louder than any apology could have. In that unspoken moment, memories unfolded in Shaq's mind. The first hints of hesitation in Eugene's stance during the club's meetings, the way his eyes flickered with discomfort when Joanna issued orders, the subtle resistance that had gone unspoken until now. He saw not just the man before him, but the journey he had taken to get here, the weight of complicity, the pull of ambition, the eventual painful realization that he could no longer stand by. Eugene's presence now was a quiet surrender, an admission of guilt without the need for justifications. It was also, unmistakably, an act of courage, the courage to face the man he'd wronged, and offer something fragile and necessary, a chance for reconciliation. The lake, calm and undisturbed, bore silent witness as Eugene slowly extended his hand, palm up, the gesture simple and profound. Shaq looked at it for a long moment, his expression shifting subtly, the tightness in his jaw easing into something softer. Without fanfare, without a word, he reached out and grasped Eugene's hand, the two men's fingers closing in a quiet clasp that said everything their voices could not. In that contact, there was no absolution, no erasure of the past, but there was recognition of shared humanity, of the capacity to change, of the quiet power of forgiveness. It was a handshake that was both ending and beginning, a bridge rebuilt not through speeches or declarations, but through a simple human connection. Eugene's shoulders sagged with relief, the tension draining from him like air from a balloon. He nodded, a silent thank you that carried more weight than any spoken words. He stepped back, his expression clearer, as if a burden had been lifted, and turned away, his steps light but purposeful. He didn't look back, knowing that what mattered had already been said. Shaq watched him go, his thoughts lingering on the quiet complexity of the moment. He wasn't naive enough to believe that one handshake could undo the damage, or erase the entitlement that had fueled the club's actions. But he understood the importance of what had just happened. Redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about acknowledging it, learning from it, and choosing to do better. As Eugene disappeared into the trees, Shaq turned back to the lake, the water reflecting the light of a new day. The shoreline was beginning to fill with life again, families setting up picnics, children skipping stones, elders gathering with thermoses of coffee. The space felt reclaimed, not by force but by presence, by the simple act of community returning to where it belonged. Joanna Sterling, once so imperious and untouchable, had retreated into silence, her influence unraveling in the wake of Eugene's revelations, and the community's shift in allegiance. Her name no longer carried the weight it once did. Her attempts to regain control met with indifference. She was a cautionary tale now, a reminder of how arrogance built on exclusion crumbled in the face of quiet, unwavering integrity. Yet Shaq found no satisfaction in her downfall. There was no gloating in his gaze as he surveyed the lake. Instead, his thoughts rested on the possibilities, The slow, deliberate work of mending what had been broken, of nurturing the fragile trust that had begun to grow in the wake of conflict. The lake wasn't just water and land. It was a canvas for renewal, a place where the community could learn to navigate the delicate balance of power, privilege, and respect. As the sun rose higher, casting golden light across the water, Shaq felt a quiet resolve settle in his chest. This wasn't the end of the story, but the beginning of something better. It wasn't about who had won or lost. It was about what could be built from the pieces left behind. Redemption wasn't a gift. It was a choice, one that Eugene had made, one that others might find the courage to make too. And as Shaq stood there, the gentle breeze ruffling the surface of the lake, he knew that the fight for respect wasn't fought with raised voices or clenched fists. It was fought with presence, with integrity, with the quiet, unshakable belief that even his smallest gestures, like a hand extended in reconciliation, could ripple outward, shaping the world in ways no one could have predicted. The first golden light of morning broke over the horizon, painting the surface of the lake with warm, shimmering hues. Shaquille O'Neal stood at the edge of the water, the soles of his boots pressing lightly into the soft earth. The air was crisp, fresh with the scent of pine and dew, and the gentle murmur of water lapping against the shore was the only sound that filled the stillness. His gaze swept across the lake, taking in its tranquil expanse, the glassy surface reflecting a sky washed clean by the dawn. He stood alone, but the sense of solitude was comforting rather than isolating. The events of the past days lingered behind him, echoes of confrontations and revelations that had reshaped not just this place, but the community tethered to it. He thought of the fishing club's entitled laughter, the sharp commands of Joanna Sterling, the oily assurances of Byron Wexler. They were gone now, their influence unraveling in the wake of truth and quiet defiance. Shaq shifted his stance, his broad shoulders rising and falling with a deep, steady breath. He let the calm seep into him, drawing strength from the land beneath his feet, from the water that had become not just a sanctuary but a symbol of resilience. The lake was his legacy, but not in the sense the world usually assigned to men like him. It wasn't a monument to wealth or status. It was a testament to quiet conviction, to the power standing firm against injustice without resorting to rage. Behind him, the sound of voices began to rise, soft and tentative at first, then growing into the comforting murmur of families arriving at the lakeshore. Children's laughter floated through the air, the splash of water mingling with the gentle thrum of conversation. Shaq turned slightly, his eyes tracing the line of people who had once been excluded from this place. Neighbors, friends, parents with coolers and blankets, kids clutching fishing rods and inflatable rafts. They moved with the tentative ease of those rediscovering a space long denied them, their steps cautious, but filled with the quiet joy of belonging. He watched a young boy toss a stone into the water, his grin wide as it skipped once, twice, before sinking beneath the surface. An elderly couple strolled hand in hand along the shore, their pace unhurried, their expressions serene. Teenagers set up folding chairs, laughing and playfully arguing about where to place them. The scene was ordinary, yet profoundly significant. It was a reclamation, not just of land, but of the simple right to exist without being pushed aside. Shaq's thoughts drifted to his mother, Lucille, and the lessons she'd imprinted on him with quiet determination. Respect isn't given because of who you are or what you've done, she had said. It's earned by how you treat others, by the patience you show, by the strength to stand tall without knocking others down. Those words echoed now, woven into the fabric of this morning, into the laughter of families finding their place by the water's edge. The confrontation with Joanna Sterling and her club had been a test, not just of ownership or authority, but of integrity. They had wielded entitlement like a weapon, assuming the world would bend to their will. But Shaq had stood firm, not with threats or bluster, but with quiet, unassailable truth. His strength had been his calm, his refusal to be provoked, his unwavering belief that dignity was a force stronger than any contract or council vote. The media's presence had faded, the cameras and reporters moving on to other stories, but the impact of what had happened here lingered, rippling outward through the community. Town meetings, once dominated by the voices of a privileged few, now buzzed with broader perspectives. Discussions about access, inclusion, and shared responsibility took on new urgency, fueled by the realization that silence in the face of exclusion was complicity. The lake had become more than a battleground. It had become a symbol of possibility. Shaq's gaze settled on Eugene Calloway, standing a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, his expression contemplative. Their earlier handshake had spoken volumes, a quiet pact of understanding and accountability. Eugene had stepped away from the toxic pull of the club, choosing instead to align himself with truth, even at the cost of his own ambitions. It wasn't a dramatic redemption, but a steady, necessary one, a reminder that change wasn't about grand gestures, but about the courage to choose a different path. Eugene nodded to Shaq, a silent acknowledgement of shared responsibility, then turned to help a young couple set up a picnic table. His movements were unhurried, his interactions genuine. Shaq watched him for a moment longer, then let his gaze drift back to the lake, the water now dancing with light as the sun climbed higher. The weight in his chest wasn't heavy. It was full, brimming with the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had done right by his principles, by his mother's teachings, by the community that now stood united at the lake's edge. This wasn't just a victory over the fishing club. It was a restoration of something deeper, a reclamation of space and respect, of belonging and dignity. A soft breeze stirred the surface of the water, carrying with it the scent of pine and the distant hum of conversation. Shaq closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sounds and scents wash over him, grounding him in the present. When he opened them, he saw not just the lake, but the people who now filled it with life. Families spread out on blankets, children chasing each other along the shore, elders sharing stories beneath the trees. There was no banner declaring victory, no speeches or ceremonies. There was only this: a lake returned to its people. A space once marred by exclusion, now reclaimed by laughter and shared moments. The quiet triumph lay in the ordinariness of it all, in the simple act of being. As the sun reached its zenith, casting a brilliant sheen across the water, Shaq felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. He wasn't just a man standing at a lakeshore. He was a steward of something larger, a guardian of a legacy that transcended ownership and wealth. His victory wasn't in the eviction of a club, but in the restoration of Rect, in the ripple of change that would continue long after this day had faded into memory. He turned, his steps measured as he began to walk along the shore, nodding to familiar faces, exchanging quiet greetings. The weight of history, of struggle, of patience and resilience, accompanied him, but it was no longer a burden. It was a part of him, woven into every step, into every glance cast across the shimmering lake. And as the laughter of children mingled with the rustle of leaves, and the soft lapping of water against the shore, Shaq knew this was his true legacy, not one carved in stone, or measured in accolades, but one etched in the hearts of those who now called this place their own. The lake, once a symbol of exclusion, had become a testament to quiet strength and enduring hope, a place where the ripples of one man's resolve had reshaped the shoreline of an entire community. If you're drawn to stories where quiet strength shatters entitlement, and ripples of change transform entire communities, keep exploring with us. Dive deeper into narratives that challenge power, celebrate integrity, and honor those who stand tall against the odds. Stay connected for more stories that don't just entertain but resonate.